Right, good
All
afternoon,
right.
everyone. Sorry, Noel, did you start? Okay, good. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jen Johnson. I'm here with my colleague, Noel Kennedy, just as Alex said. We're excited to be here with you today to present about our school safety and prevention work. Noel, would you like to introduce us our first slide?
I'd be happy to. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Noel Kennedy. I use the acronym, the pronouns he, him, and I work at the Oregon Department of Education. Just a reminder before we dive into this content about the school safety prevention system, that there's going to be conversations today. We're not going to be doing a deep dive, but there will be some conversations and some highlights about sensitive topics, including violence and suicide. And we know that some of these topics may be activating for some people. Many folks who are engaging in this content are professionals. And this is prevention work that we do every single day. And we also are human beings that bring our lived experience to the work. And so we just want to remind folks that this is going to be the topic and that there are some tips on there for how to take care of yourself. And wanted to just give that activation warning before we dive in. Thank you so much for being here. And we look forward to sharing more about with our content.
Thank you, Noel. Our agenda for today is to talk a little bit about our Safe and Inclusive Schools team, give you an overview of the school safety prevention system itself, talk a bit about the specialists who carry out that work throughout Oregon, and then go over each of the areas of the system. And then at the end, we'll talk about best practices for schools and districts and have a little bit of time to give you some opportunities for questions if you have them. Here is a look at our entire team. As I said, my name is Jen Johnson. Most folks just call me JJ. I'm the School Safety Prevention Systems Coordinator on our team, and I go by she, her pronouns. Noel was able to introduce himself as well. We also have Danica Jensen Weiner on our team, who is our Educational Equity, Safety, and Restorative Justice Specialist, and our Grant Manager, Miriam Neidhart McPhee. And we are the Safe and Inclusive Schools team here at ODE. So let's get started by talking about the school safety and prevention system. On our team, we refer to it as the system itself. This system is codified in legislation, and down below there you can see the Oregon Revised Statute. If you're like me and love to read law in your spare time, you can click on those links, which I'm sure Alex will send out later. And then there's also the Oregon Administrative Rule, and we'll talk about where those come into play here in just a second. So the scope of the system itself is to allow for assistance to school districts and education service districts across the state to decrease acts of harassment, intimidation, or bullying and acts of cyberbullying. And the Oregon Administrative Rule brings in the prevention of sexual violence. It also is there to decrease and support the decrease of youth suicidal behavior, which includes suicide prevention, intervention, and postvention, excuse me. It is there, it's also written in there, implementing a multidisciplinary student safety assessment. We refer to that as behavioral safety assessment. Many of you may still hear the terms behavioral threat assessment or threat assessment. And then the third section there is the promotion and use of the Safe Oregon tip line. So looking at the system, I'm going to give you a little bit of a visual of how to look at the three main areas of work underneath the system. So you have behavioral safety threat assessment. And if you look there, you can see the definition of what that is. So it's helping us identify situations that may pose a risk of harm or violence, and then determine the seriousness of that risk. And something really important here is that we are not identifying students who pose a risk. We're identifying situations that may pose a risk of harm or violence. And by framing it that way, we're really looking for those red flags that we may see, and supporting our student, the whole student in itself. So looking for those mental health supports, where those lagging skills or gaps may be, and supporting our students in our school. It's a two-level system. So we have level one, which is that interdisciplinary school-based team, which would consist of the principal, school counselor, perhaps a student success coach if you have those, anybody else that's on that's within the school itself. And then if there does seem to be a case of risk of violence or harm that is credible, we're going to elevate that to our level 2 team, which is that multidisciplinary team. Some of our districts have capacity to host that level 2 team themselves. And that level 2 team is going to consist of your community partners. So your community mental health teams, school psychologists, law enforcement, and juvenile services if needed, and Department of Human Services, as well as a member of the school team to be there to help present the case. Again, some districts have the capacity to host that level 2 team. A lot of our ESDs host that regional level 2 team at the ESD and have memorandums of understandings or MOUs with the school districts within their region to have those cases brought to them, and then they will host that MDT, that multidisciplinary team for them. For suicide prevention, intervention, and postvention, using that continuous improvement, regularly updating districts' ADDIES Act or youth suicide prevention plans, having appropriate suicide prevention training available every year for all staff and educators in the district, and promoting the positive and inclusive school culture within every level, district office, elementary, middle, high school, and then connecting those suicide prevention efforts throughout all levels and all tiers, knowing that whatever is outlined and written in the ADDIES Act plan is being disseminated down all the way to classroom teachers, to instructional assistants, to the folks that are working in cafeterias, so that everybody understands what it means to not only have your ADDIES Act plan, but what to do if a student comes to a staff who has been recognized as a support person or a trusted adult and comes to them with suicide ideation or thoughts of suicide. And then finally, that third bucket of bullying, harassment, intimidation, sexual violence, and cyberbullying prevention. And this is really that bucket of culture and climate within a school. So creating those safe, welcoming school environments where students feel a sense of belonging, focusing on their well-being, their mental health, and the ability to provide that multiple avenues for reporting bullying incidents if they have them, making sure that we're offering restorative practices, repairing harm, and that we're ensuring that there is an adult in our buildings that students identify as a safe and trusted adult. No?
So many of you have seen the framework of the pyramid within schools. And so this slide is just a way for us to think about how to put the school safety and prevention system into sort of tiered supports. So if we think about prevention, when it comes to the 3 buckets of work the system covers that we just talked about, in the prevention realm, we're thinking about suicide prevention trainings. We're thinking about district suicide prevention plans. We're thinking about bullying prevention programs and every student belong trainings. In those 3 buckets, when we think about interventions, we're thinking about those behavioral safety assessments that JJ was talking about, individual suicide risk screeners, and promotion and use of the Safe Oregon tip line. And then when we think about sort of the tip of that pyramid, when we think about response, we're thinking about crisis response, bias incident response, suicide postvention incidents and healing, and sexual incident response. And that's sort of our thinking about the buckets of work the school safety and prevention system covers and putting that in the framework of that prevention, intervention, response tiered supports.
So looking now, this photo is a picture of our school safety and prevention specialists. So these folks are the ones that actually are out in districts, out in ESDs, using the system, the elements of the system and those activities to provide that support to our educators, to our districts, the ones that we really credit all of the work that's being done in the state right now with safety prevention. So you can see there's most of them there. Right now, we have one to sometimes 2 if they split the position in every ESD. So looking at what they are, what their role is in statute. So this goes back to the Oregon Revised Statute or the OARs. The system is supported by those, we call them SSPSs. As you know, in education, we do love our acronyms. So they serve regions of the state. Those regions, of course, the hub being the Education Service District. They're cross-trained in those behavior safety assessments, the prevention of youth suicide, and the prevention of bullying, intimidation, harassment, cyberbullying, and sexual violence. And then they also provide facilitation of those trainings. They provide the trainings themselves. They coordinate local teams like that multidisciplinary team for behavior safety assessment. And they also provide ongoing consultation or technical assistance to the districts in their region. Here's a quick visual of where those education service districts are located throughout the state in case you're unfamiliar with that. We do have on the left, you can see that's a list of who they all are and their emails. We will get you a link here in just a bit where you can see an updated list of all of those. We have an internal document that changes as needed with those folks. The specialist enroll in the OARs do provide ongoing information sharing and assistance to district and education districts, and they're able to provide assistance to our private and alternative schools and nonprofits within their region that support youth-centered activities for public school students. They do make sure that all of the supports that they offer within those areas of work, including the use and promotion of the Safe Oregon tip line, are accessible to our historically, traditionally, and currently underserved and marginalized students and youth. And the goal of this system is to make sure that all of the work that they do is designed to result in fewer disproportionate and more equitable outcomes for those historically and traditionally and currently underserved and marginalized students and youth. So here's just a little bit of data from the time that our system started, which was we started collecting data back in 2021. Really, the school safety prevention specialists started their positions back in 2020. So you can see that in 2021 to 2022, we had a smaller crew of SSPSs, just about, I think there was 11, mostly part-time folks. We were able to train 670 individuals on the areas or activities of either behavior safety assessment, suicide prevention, or the prevention of bullying, harassment, intimidation, sexual violence, or cyberbullying. So just 670. In the year 22-23, we were able to get more funding to allot for more school safety prevention specialists. And that year, we had almost a full crew of 19. We were able to train almost 6,000 folks. And then this last year, 23-24, we were over that 6,000 participants trained, and I believe we ended the year just under 6,400, pretty close to what you see there. This year, I will say we are on target to actually increase that amount.
So in this next section, I'm going to specifically talk about suicide prevention, intervention, and postvention. JJ gave you some background on the school safety and prevention system and the specialists who support that system in each ESD. That legislation, the school safety prevention system legislation, was passed in 2019 and included suicide prevention within it. Related, the same year, Addie's Act was passed. It did not come with funding, but that funding was embedded on suicide prevention within the system. So the same year Addie's Act was passed in 2019 as Senate Bill 52. And Addie's Act requires district boards to adopt a suicide prevention policy, and then it requires districts to adopt and post a suicide prevention plan. So it's two related but separate components. And you'll see that more highlighted here on the next slide, that those two things are related. We expect school districts to have a suicide prevention board policy, and then that board policy requires the districts to have a plan. And the plan needs to have these legislatively mandated components that you see on the screen here. I'll put a link to that infographic in the chat later when I'm not talking, but you'll see that that infographic covers the legislatively mandated components that Addie's Act requires every school district plan to include. Since 2019, we've made some significant growth statewide on the developing of plans and of policies. So, for example, right now we have 183 school districts out of 197 in Oregon. That's 93% of the state that has an adopted suicide prevention Addie's Act policy. So we're doing amazing, and you can see compared to a year and a half ago the enormous growth that we've made. And I always like to pause here and say, do you know, does your school district have a suicide prevention policy? That's something you can check. And if not, your school safety and prevention specialist or I am happy to help with that. Again, related, the second component of Addie's Act is suicide prevention plan, a district plan that's posted to websites. And you'll see here on the screen that we have 190 of the 197 school districts that have a completed and posted plan. And again, you'll see compared to a year and a half ago, the enormous growth we've made in that area. And again, this is a challenge. If you're one of those districts that don't yet have a developed plan, it's not posted, this is an opportunity for you to ask district leaders to start developing that. And if you do have a plan, and we're going to talk more about this later, how is it actionable at the school level? Do you know about your plan? Does your staff know about your plan? And we're going to talk about that here shortly. One component for Addie's Act that is in state law, and no federal law or talking points can change this. This is in state law within Addie's Act, is that every Addie's Act plan has to have specific components that address for youth that are considered high risk for suicide due to the identities they hold. And JJ is going to hit next, and you'll see a list that's listed in Addie's Act legislation here that students that are in one or even more have intersecting identities, even more subgroups that are listed here: LGBTQ, 2SI+, students that are BIPOC, bereaved by suicide, students that are living in out-of-home settings, youth with disabilities, youth dealing with and navigating mental illness or substance abuse, and historically and currently underserved youth. Those youth are considered at high risk for suicide. And I always like to take a pause here to just name that the reason these youth, these focal groups are considered at high risk is not inherently because of the identity they hold, but it is the identity and living in a system that's built, frankly, on white supremacy and that culture that we live in, that these students in these focal group need additional supports. And again, that's required in state legislation, Addie's Act legislation, that school districts' plans address the additional ways that they might support suicide prevention efforts for these focal groups. And that's backed by data. You'll see that here in the next port that JJ is going to put up. This is one of those yes and moments where we're going to pause and we're going to celebrate. So the first part I want to celebrate is that from 2018 to 2021, and we use a little bit of old data because of the way suicides are counted. This is sort of the most up-to-date official data we have. But over that 4-year span from 2018 to 2021, Oregon saw a 27% decrease in suicide rates. That's a pause to say, yes, that is a huge thank you to the amazing work folks like you are doing every day in your school communities and your communities at large. That is a celebration, and we need to pause and celebrate that. And this is that and where we see an opportunity for continued growth, because unfortunately there's racial disparities within that data. So we've seen that deaths by suicide for youth identified as white falling over that time. And I have preliminary data that's more recent. This trend is continuing. We're seeing that youth that identify as white their data on suicide death continues to trend downward, which is a celebration. And the number of youth suicides for youth of other races and other ethnicities have either remained similar to 2018 or are increasing. And so that's an opportunity for growth. We're going to celebrate the work we've done. We're going to celebrate that you all are continuing to literally save lives every day. And we're going to name that we have additional work to do, specifically supporting these focal groups of youth that are at high risk for suicide. So the next slide, my last slide for this section, is how might you do that? Here's some suggestions for action steps. And again, I'll put a link to this infographic, the second infographic in the chat as well. How might you do that as a school district employee, as a school building employee, as a school building leader? What can you do? So here's two things I encourage you to think about. First, do you have an ADISAC plan? Hopefully you're one of the school districts that are one of the many, one of the majority that already have a plan. Do you know about it? Does your staff know about it? Is it posted to your district's website? So that's first and foremost, is checking on that. Second, do staff in your school have the appropriate training for their role? And so again, I'll put this infographic with the links in the chat later, but best practices is that all staff, that includes staff like teachers, building administrators, counselors, librarians, but also includes bus drivers, nutrition services, custodial staff, that all staff are trained annually on a suicide prevention 101 training. Typically that's QPR, there's other options, but that's regularly trained to those on a yearly basis. And then if you are a staff that may have more interactions with students, maybe you need to be higher trained in like assist, things like that may be more about safety planning, maybe about suicide intervention based on your roles. Two other additional factors you might consider focusing on is, how are you building belonging within your school? How are you ensuring that students feel like they have a sense of self, they have a sense of identity, and they're connected both to their peers and to a trusted staff member at your school? That is a highly effective upstream preventative measure, is building belonging amongst all of our students. And especially that is true for our youth that are in those focal groups or have intersecting identities with those focal groups that are considered at high risk. Building belonging and supporting them, feeling themselves in their skin, being celebrated in their culture, that is immensely impactful in suicide prevention. So we encourage you to keep up that work. And then lastly, how are you engaging your students, your staff, your community, your families with culturally and linguistically responsive resources, including 988, Safe Oregon Tip Line, and Youth Line? How are you encouraging staff, students, and community members to be aware of those resources and to know how to reach out to them when they need help? So I'm going to put some links in the chat when I'm done talking here in a second. But if you have any questions about suicide prevention, intervention, postvention work in your region, in your schools, in your districts, I'm here to support. Your school safety prevention specialist here to support. And most importantly, I hope you're hearing from me, thank you. Keep up the great work. Keep building belonging amongst your students, your staff, and community. It matters and it's saving lives. So great work.
Oh. All right, next section under the school safety prevention system is the behavioral safety threat assessment. And we're also going to put together sexual incident response or problematic sexual behavior. So sexual incident response committees often function parallel to the behavior safety assessment or threat assessment teams, only because the process is very similar, and often you have the same folks at the table when you run these teams and the process. So looking at some trends from fall of 2024. So this again is very recent thinking back to the beginning of this school year. Over 700 children and teenagers, including at least one fourth grader, have been arrested and accused of making violent threats against schools. And that was coming straight out of the New York Times. Looking a little bit deeper into what was happening in the state of the country, more reports from the School Safety Center from Ohio about the increase in threats that had been called in and concerns about violence. And again, if you think about what happened back in the fall, we started this school year with a school shooting. And from there, we had multiple reports of false school shootings that were called in and other things that the entire country dealt with. And so when you start a year like that, it really sets the pace for fear, for dysregulation, for students to start thinking, for parents, for communities, are we safe in our schools? And so just keeping that in mind about where we started when it comes to school safety in this country, we're going to move into a little bit about how Oregon really focuses on the prevention of that. So the first thing I really would like to highlight is how our team is partnering with Safe Oregon Tip Line, and most of the schools within Oregon are signed up or connected with Safe Oregon, which is great. It is not a requirement, although we do encourage you to do so. One of the new pieces coming out of Safe Oregon this year, in collaboration with the school safety prevention specialists and Noel and my teams, is an online campaign to help support the online bullying, the online intimidation, and the online threats and online fake threats as well of that kids see online all the time. So, I don't know if you have a teenager in the home or even as young, 6th grade, 5th grade, kids have phones in their hands all the time. They're privy to social media, all of these things. And so one of the things that we're talking about is that bullying, harassment, and all of these things often happens and threats often happens more so online than it does during the school day these days. And so we have partnered with Safe Oregon for the Report, Don't Repost campaign, encouraging students to stop rumors when they see them come across online and to report things that don't look look right, don't sound right, don't feel right to them, instead of continuing them on and reposting them to continue on to create that sense of unease and to perpetually spread that throughout the school. So this is just a couple of examples of what Safe Oregon is going to be putting out here in the next couple of months. And we do have some of this available on our website where schools will be able to download it or send them out for printing. And if you're signed up with Safe Oregon, this will be part of the available resources that you'll be able to order from them in the fall. So looking at behavior safety assessment, if you're looking at that green, darker green section on the left there. Again, we do want to just really reiterate that it's identifying situations that are posing a risk of violence or harm. And so we have those two different levels posted there on either side. So looking at from a school level, that level 1 school-based team, and that's where you have behavior that indicates that possible threat of harm or violence, and that could come from a teacher in the school. It could come from a recess aide at a school. It could come from anyone who brings that to the principal, to the counselor. You're following through those level 1 forms. You're collecting information. You're collecting the interviews, all of those pieces that come with that. In Oregon, most of our districts are using the Salem-Kaiser model to follow through with the behavior safety assessment work. Again, if the risk of harm or violence does seem to be evident, then we're going to move that to the level 2 team, like we talked about earlier. One of the pieces that we are really working on is ensuring that issues of bias and equity are addressed throughout this process. And I'm going to talk a little bit more here on the next slide. All right, so actually, go back just a bit. Nope, here we go. Okay, so here's some checklists for you for your behavior safety assessment and some sexual violence action steps for you and your district or your ESD. So you're going to check that your school is signed up with Safe Oregon. So you can actually email your school safety prevention specialist or ask your administrator. They'll be able to tell you whether or not you're signed up for Safe Oregon. If you're not, there's a very simple process to do so. Take steps to ensure that every student has an adult that they identify as a safe person, that they know that they can go to if something is bothering them or if they need someone to talk to. Go through your discipline policies, looking for those inclusive practices and access to academic engagement opportunities. And keeping in mind that the goal and the focus of behavior safety assessment and CIRC is supporting the student, not disciplining them. And we do understand that there may be consequences associated with behavior safety assessment as part of the process and as well as CIRC as part of the process, but that's not your end goal. The end goal is not to say, well, we suspended him, so, we're done here. Or, we've, that's it. He's suspended and eventually he, pending expulsion. The goal is to get support for the student and find the best support and pathway for that student to be to gain their academic success while also supporting potential victims and potential bystanders within that entire event. And so one of the pieces that in talking with Courtney McCarthy, who works on the Salem-Kaiser model, is that when we get calls for behavior safety assessment technical assistance, we don't always assume that the student has automatically been suspended. It may be one thing that may be done so that the team can decide what to do, but it doesn't mean that it's automatically done. Is that always the best choice for our students when keeping them engaged in academics for their sake, and whatever that looks like, that's the best, most safest way possible is what we are looking at as far as student support, and also ensuring that everyone within that process and within that event and who has experienced that event also feels safe, also feels heard, and also feels seen. And then in the last one is ensuring your school district are engaged with a regional district level 2 behavior safety assessment and CERC team. Right now, Oregon Department of Education is working alongside John Van Driel and his Salem-Kaiser model to create what we're calling the Oregon model of behavior safety assessment to ensure that there is bias awareness and culturally relevant processes built within the Salem-Kaiser district, and that we're making sure that the disproportionate data that may be coming out of that is decreasing across our currently and historically underserved youth populations. And so in the next couple of years, you're going to see that our school safety prevention specialists will be able to bring training for that model to districts and to ESDs throughout the entire state for districts to utilize. All right, and then looking at bullying, harassment, intimidation, and cyberbullying. Here are some current trends that we're seeing as far as what youth are utilizing each of these platforms for. So you can see Discord, Snapchat, Instagram is really where we're going to see the bulk of bullying, harassment, and intimidation. I could definitely add some group chats if on text messaging up there as well. I'm sure you all have heard of a few others. As far as sexual images, sexual exploitation, sex trafficking, the bulk we're seeing is Instagram, Facebook, things that typically where the messages don't disappear. And when it comes to trends in Oregon, where we're seeing and hearing online threats of violence in Oregon, we're definitely seeing these top 3 platforms coming into play. So Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram. Facebook is definitely falling in the wayside, especially over the last year or so. Snapchat is definitely a big one, as well as Instagram. I'll give you just a minute to read through this scenario for a behavior safety assessment. So we put this up here just to give you a pretty accurate description or scenario of what a typical BSAT case can look like, just to get a feel for if you have not been part of a behavior safety assessment case or been part of that process before. Again, the use of Snapchat, posts with photos showing excuse me, showing a pistol in a backpack or a gun in a backpack with a caption and all of that. And then, of course, that goes back to this is where we want to continue to elevate the work that Safe Oregon's doing with reporting things and not reposting them, finding the most the most ease of use of reporting these things, whether it's Safe Oregon or having an admin in a building that is easily accessible to our communities, to our students, that they can report these things right away so that we are preventing any events from taking place. One of the big pieces that we're working on as far as bullying prevention goes is working with the current state standards that Oregon has for all teachers, grades K through 12. So we have done a deep dive into multiple state standards. So what you see before you right now is the health standards. And if you are looking over on the left here, you can see my mouse is circling the number 2. So this is actually grade 2 in our health standards. And what we've done is taken the big 3 buckets of work under the school safety prevention system. So you have behavioral safety assessment or violence prevention, suicide prevention, intervention, postvention, and then here you have that bullying, harassment, intimidation. But anytime the bullying, harassment, intimidation is named specifically in a standard, you're going to see an X in that cell underneath that heading, and then it's going to be highlighted. And I want to show you why here. So if I go over to line 104, this is second grade, it says, and this is being taught in health in second grade, recognize bullying, cyberbullying, and teasing and multiple types of relationships and the need to tell a trusted source that can help. So if I go back a slide, you can see how the work of Safe Oregon and in collaboration with our school safety prevention specialist directly aligns with this health standard that's taught in second grade. And it's not taught in isolation, because you'll see that if as you go through these standards, it's taught again in other grade areas and builds upon each other as they get older. And so this is just one example. You can even go down to grade 4 down here. It says identify strategies for staying safe online. So that's just one more connection to that. So if I look over here, I went all the way back to kindergarten. It's not too early to teach about being safe. So down here, you can see we have highlighted the different standards that we've looked at. So you can see health standards, the T-cell standards, and school counseling standards. I've highlighted this section up at the top, and we're going to specifically look at standard K.SF A.2, which is understand how to identify trusted adults that can help keep people safe at home, at school, and at the community. So I'll give you a little bit better look at that standard there. Oops, so let me go back. And so just looking at that, how to identify a trusted adult that can help keep people safe at home, at school, and in the community. So just looking at that standard, thinking to yourself, like, where does that fall as far as the work that the school safety prevention system and the specialists do across the state when it comes to school safety? And if you're thinking, well, all of them, you're absolutely right. It's violence prevention, it's suicide prevention, and it's bullying, harassment, cyberbullying prevention. It's identifying that trusted adult, and that goes all the way back to belonging, to well-being, and to creating schools that students want to be in. It's having a trusted adult and adults that are there to build those positive relationships with kids. And when something's not right, when they are having those days that perhaps they're having thoughts of suicide, that they have that trusted adult that they can go to and say, hey, I need to tell you something, and that adult can help get them the support and the services they need. So here are some action plans when it comes to bullying, harassment, intimidation, and cyberbullying. Again, there you can see that link to Safe Oregon right there. Integrating your school staff and mental health well-being initiatives and supports throughout the school year. We all know that every month definitely has its, hey, it's Violence Prevention Month in April. That's great, but really we need to be talking about violence prevention every month. We need to be talking about school safety every month. You know, we need to be talking about mental health and well-being every month, and it's for our kids, for our youth, and also for our educators and the folks who are working in our schools and for our schools as well. Reviewing our discipline policies and code of conduct to ensure that bullying and harassment are specifically addressed, including safety supports for our victims. And one piece about that is that remember that when we are creating those safety plans for our victim of bullying and for the bully themselves, that for the victim, they have already experienced an event. They have already been the victim. They should not be victimized anymore. So when we're creating a safety plan, if schedules need to be changed, it should be changed for the bully, not for the victim, right? If there's a no contact order and you know, like it's a fourth grader and a fourth grader and you have to split their teachers, the bully needs to be moved to the other classroom. Well, we don't usually move kids. Like, this is where we make that exception. The victim has already gone through enough. We need to make sure that they are feeling safe, that they are feeling supported. And we do need to do the same for the person who did the bullying, for the youth who did the bullying. And we need to make sure also that we're providing those supports, those mental health supports, and that repair, and also not re-victimizing the student who was bullied. All right, so just really quickly, I'm going to throw up the best practices on the screen. On the screen, I'm going to put up the best practices in school safety and prevention. Just so you have an idea of what our recommendations would be for your school, for your district, for your ESD in each of these areas, as far as like, hey, I don't know where to start. Here are some places that you can start to make sure that you have all of these things in place. Hopefully you have some ideas written down for today from Noel or from myself. If you don't, we do have a few minutes for some questions, and Noel and I are always able and willing to do some one-on-ones or some emails if in fact you need it. And on the screen there is our SIS team email. It's monitored by every member of our team. So whatever question you have, whoever is most apt at answering that for you, will get back to you. Thank you. And if Alex is still here, I'm sure he'll come on screen right now.
Yes. And thank you both. I'll stop the recording here.